Well, here we are once again, another Friday and another piece of North Melbourne royalty. Big thanks to Stewie Ward and the team at National Make Good Solutions. They're the one who helped make us all this happen. And look, we're just here to discuss a lot of the journeys in sports and business and entertainment and some of the previous guests that we've had. We've had the great Jason McCartney. Then we had the Shinbone of the Century, Glenn Archer. Then we had Wayne Sposs. And then we upped the ante. We had the King, Wayne Carey. But JB really wanted to make sure that he followed the King because he reckons that was his only rightful place that he followed after the King himself. So here you go, mate.
You have just named North Melbourne royalty. To quote that amazing movie, I am 100% not worthy. But it's great chatting to you, mate. Speaking of North Melbourne royalty, and we both love the club. So anytime I can talk about it, I'm very happy to do so.
100%. Now, just a bit on isolation. I reckon you were ahead of the game a few years ago, mate. That you were the only person to actually do their own radio show from their bedroom.
Yeah, well, not the bedroom, study at the farm in Adelaide, and mate, it worked, and that's the thing. And now everyone's doing it for obvious reasons. It's not quite the same because you can't see, mind you, not being able to see Bill is not a bad thing, but you can't see the other bloke you're working with, and that makes it a bit weird. But yeah, I mean, these are weird times, and everyone, all the brekkie shows around the country, all the Drive network shows, they're all remotely broadcasting. It's just how it is. But, mate, I've been very lucky. As you know, I've been coming here to Port Fairy for 24 years. We knew that the lockdown was coming, and we also knew that the remote broadcasting was available. So we took a place on the beach here, been here for a couple of months. We'll be here for at least 2 more, I reckon. And if you have to isolate somewhere, Causa, except for up in the sunshine, this is all I've got to do is open the golf course, mate. I'll be a very happy man.
Well, hopefully that comes sooner rather than later. I don't think you're that far away from doing it. You hope so.
No, I hope so. I had, as you know, a beautiful golf course down here too. In fact, your old, well, I don't know whether he was your old teammate, Knuckle Shoal, Brad.
Yeah, Brad. Well, Brad and I made our debut together against St Kilda in 1993. Brad and I in the same game.
There you go. And then he only played 3 or 4 for us, didn't he? And then he buggered off to Geelong and had a very good career. But his idiot brother, Dr. Shoal, of course, played a lot of tennis ball head. Yeah, the old toe ball head, and was an unbelievable player for us too, especially in big games. I hope this doesn't get broadcast in Bright where he lives, because he's already got a healthy enough opinion of himself, Causa. But he did play bloody good finals footy for us.
Well, they probably only just got electricity last week, so they probably wouldn't get this.
Exactly.
So, look, going back to you, mate, take us through. You had the choice of either doing footy and cricket, and how did that go in the Brayshaw household? Because especially with the older brother Mark, and so Mark's obviously ended up going to footy, and then your journey when you ended up, was your journey made for you because you missed out? Was it Jeff Miles that he stopped you from actually getting a senior game?
Yes. Well, no, it goes back a bit earlier than that. I was always a better cricketer, and Mark was always a better footballer. So it was never really a decision, I don't reckon, for either of us. We both loved playing the other one. But I had played for about 5 years, or maybe not that, 4 years for WA, on and off, much more off than on. But, in those days, WA had a pretty good side, with Jeff Marsh and Mike Valletta and Tom Moody and Graham Wood and Kim Hughes. And it was a pretty tough team to get a game in. So I was playing 1 game and then out for 4, and it was, just victim of circumstance a bit. So when I was about 21, I said to the coach of WA, I'm sick of the pre-seasons we do. They're, boring. And I'd spoken to Jared Neesham, who was coach of Claremont in the Waffle. And I said, Jed, if you don't mind, I'll come down and do my training with you. And then, I'll be fitter than any of the cricketers anyway, and it'll just be a different way of getting through pre-season. And he's a ripper. He said, yeah, no worries, come down. Anyway, Causa, on my life, I never planned to play footy. I only wanted to go down there and train, mainly with the reserves, just do all the lane work and the leg work and get fit and hang with a different group of blokes. A lot of them I already knew because Mark had obviously played there before going to North. Anyway, I got down there, did the first month, which nearly killed me because I'd come off a cricket summer. And as you know, cricketers are nowhere near as fit as footballers. So I walked straight into the Claremont season. They already started playing. And as I say, the first month, I didn't know what hit me. But after a month, the reserves coach, bloke called John Dimmer, came up to me and said, "Mate, you're in on the weekend." And I said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm just training, mate. He goes, no, you're playing on the weekend. Anyway, so I played about round 5 or 6 in the reserves. We had a bloody good side, ended up winning the premiership, actually. And then the game you're talking about is about round 18, 17, something like that. Jared Neeshams walked into the reserves huddle and said, Skinny, which everyone called me, yourself included, Skinny, come over here. And I walked over there and he said, mate, you're with us. And again, I said, what are you talking about? He goes, no, mate, you're playing in the ones. And I went, shit, Anyway, so trained with them that night, went into the team meeting. If you can believe it, at 185 centimetres causer, I'm playing centre half back the next day. And went home, like I don't even remember the car ride home. I was that pumped. Anyway, the team manager rang me at about 9 o'clock and said that Jeff Miles has been dropped from the West Coast Eagles. So he's come back into the Claremont team, so you're out. And so I was in the ones for about 2.5 hours on a Friday. And then, mate, we won, as I say. I was in the league squad for the rest of that, all through the finals, which was exciting in itself. The ones and the twos played in the granny. We won and the league team sadly lost. And then I went to South Australia the next year and never played footy again. So that was the sum total of my footy. But I will say this. Now, Jason Norrish, that's Dave O'Muir. They had some amazing players in that team who all went on and played AFL footy. I will say this, Causa, that 3/4 of one footy season was the most fun I had playing sport in my life. It eclipsed any cricket I ever played. The blokes at the club were brilliant. And cricket's I always say this, cricket's an individual team game. Whereas footy, as you know, is 100% a team game. Doesn't matter what you do. If in those days, your 19 other mates don't go with you, then, you're not going to win. So I absolutely loved it. And I still run into the blokes I played with. And I still, when I see them, have a huge smile on my face. Danny Green's brother, Brendan Green, he was in that team, went on and played for the West Coast. Just a ripper crew of young blokes. And it was just a blast. I loved it.
And then you obviously, making the choice to go to cricket, you weren't you're a reasonably good cricketer. You averaged 42 with the bat, and you ended up playing in 2 Shield finals. You played for South Australia, Western Australia. One of the Shield finals that you actually played in. What were the names that were in the opposition for Western Australia? And you got Adam Gilchrist, Damien Martin, Justin Langer.
Unbelievable. That game was one of the greatest ever Shield finals played, actually, at the Adelaide Oval. But they had Justin Langer, Damien Martin, Tom Moody, Adam Gilchrist, Joe Angel, Brendan Julian, Brad Hogg. I'm probably leaving a couple out. So they had an unbelievable side. And we had Jason Gillespie, Tim May, Peter McIntyre, who else Greg Blewett, Darren Lehman. So, there were probably, thinking about it, there were probably 12 or 13 international players in that game. And that was an incredible game. That's where Shane George and Peter McIntyre held out for about an hour and a half to draw the game, and therefore we won the final. But the previous one was in 1987-88, and that was even more star-studded. That was only my 3rd game. Queensland had, again, I'll probably leave some out, but they had Ian Botham, Carl Rackerman, Craig McDermott, Alan Border, Greg Ritchie, Ian Healy, Robbie Kerr, so I think in the game, and then WA had all those blokes I mentioned, Kim Hughes, Graham Wood, Terry Alderman, Bruce Reid, Tom Moody, Jeff Marsh, Michael Ledup, So I think in that game, there were only 3 players who hadn't played cricket for Australia. So those 2 games were completely nuts, and they were both amazing games, and thankfully the team I was playing for won both of them. But we also had the great misfortune, Causa, of playing in the Shield final in Brisbane, where Queensland won their first ever Sheffield Shield against South Australia and gave us an almighty pumping. So I've been on the receiving end as well.
And by your own admission, you wouldn't exactly be the most imposing physical specimen, no. JB. I wouldn't have thought so. But how did you cope with the sledging side of cricket? Was it growing up with your brother? Because you're both very good at the chat. So did you have a fairly good grounding from your brother in order to cope? But what was it like? your third game of cricket, you're playing against your heroes. Did they?
Yep.
What was the best sledge that someone of note that you can remember they actually gave you?
Oh, geez, cause. Well, back in those days,
narrow it down to 10.
But back in those days, as you know, sledging was part of the game. Like, you never even worried about it. You just knew that every game you played, you're going to cop it from someone.
Yeah.
And so and as you got better and older, it sort of dropped off a bit. But certainly in those young years, I used to cop it. Merv Hughes was the main one that I used to tangle with because he absolutely hated me. And because I was private school and, swagging around a bit, and he was, the other side of the tracks and, working class at Werribee and Footscray and all the rest of it. And he took a disliking to me from the start. The funny bit about it was that we actually got on like a house on fire off the field, but on the field, so, mate, there are 1,000 I could tell you, and most of them are R-rated, so I won't. But a couple I could tell you. One stage I'd been batting for a while because I actually had a pretty good record against Victoria, so I used to go all right against him, and I've been batting for a while, and he's followed through. And the thing about Murphy is he used to follow through really close to where you were. He's followed through, went all the way down the pitch. So he's followed through about 1.5 meters away, social distancing even back then. And he said to me, you're actually quite hard to bowl to. And I thought, Corey, after all of this time, he's actually going to say something positive. After giving it to me for a decade, I looked at him and I went, oh, yeah, why is that? He said, because you only got 2 stumps to aim at because you got the other one shoved up your ass. And I remember thinking, nothing's changed here. But the funniest bit was, in his last year, he finished about a year before I did. And the thing I loved about Merv was he was an animal competitor. He just went at you from the first ball. And like you with footy, when you played against blokes like that, for me, Corey, that's what made sport brilliant. Those blokes that just never gave an inch and just went at you from the start. You knew you were in a contest, and I just loved it. I loved playing against Merv. And so this day, we're batting back end of the day. Can't remember the state of the game, but I knew that this was going to be the last ball of the day, and Merv was going to bowl it, and I was facing. So he's wheeling away from the members' end at the MCG. I knew it was going to be a bouncer. So in he comes, bouncer, I'm ducking already. The ball goes flying over my head. I stand back up thinking, thank Christ for that, the day's over. Merv's 1 metre away from me again, and he looked at me and he said, I can hate you. That's all he had. And everyone on the ground just started pissing themselves laughing. So the funny bit about it was, walked off. We must have declared overnight. I can't remember what the state of the game was. Anyway, the next year, that was the end of the season. The next year, as luck would have it, we were playing Victoria at the MCG. So it was your 100% deja vu. I'm batting 3. We lost a wicket. I walk out and Big Merv's got the ball in his hand, exactly the same end. The scenario was exactly the same. Anyway, so I'm middle and leg, facing up. There he is, in he comes with the stupid sort of big long run up. Anyway, so you know what happened. Yeah. Bouncer, I duck underneath. I look up, he's 1.5 meters away from me, and he looked at me straight in the eye and he went, I still fucking hate you. 6 months later, and the boys, Dino and Simon O'Donnell and Paul Rifle, that phlegm, everyone's just fallen on the ground laughing. So the sledging thing was always there, but there can be fun with it, and Merv was one of the best.
And just on that, what I've always wanted to know, like obviously you're very good mates with Bluey, and I've been away with Bluey, and I've probably never asked this question to him, but I'm asked to you. When you're out on the cricket ground, do you have a genuine fear of when someone's coming into bowl that fast? Because for me personally, the thought of standing there, we were lucky. Wayne Keir and I were lucky enough to play in a David Byrne testimonial game in the MCG, and I think they had Colin Croft and a couple of these guys that were the wrong side of 40 playing in this game, and they could still throw them down then. And I was absolutely shitting my pants. Now, you played at the Wacker when the Wacker was really the Wacker. Like, we're talking about it would be bouncing like no tomorrow. How, as a cricketer, how do you actually get get over that fear of you could literally get hurt pretty badly.
Well, for a start, you're talking about Bluey. He was one of the rare players that never had that fear. The faster the bowling, the more he enjoyed it. I don't know what was wrong with him. He had an imbalance somewhere because he just loved it. And when it got halfway down, he used to take it on. And, I love the way he played fast bowling. And I wish I could play fast bowling the same way in my time, but I couldn't. It wasn't a skill of mine. And, mate, anyone who tells you, beside of maybe him, Ricky Ponting in my time, I'm trying to think. Matty Elliott was a very good player of fast bowling. But, there might have been 2 or 3 who can legitimately look at your causer and say, I wasn't scared. Everyone else was. And they're lying if they say they weren't. And I remember, you talk about the Wacker. I remember playing the West Indies at the Wacker when I was about 19. They had Ambrose, Walsh, Patterson, Marshall and Bishop. And, mate, I remember walking out there. I look at my young blokes now, like they're George and Fred are 14 and 12, and George loves his cricket. He's 14. I wasn't that much older than him, and I'm facing those blokes. And seriously, I remember looking up. The other ones, for some reason, didn't feel too bad, but I'd watched all my life Malcolm Marshall just destroy batsmen and destroy, smash people, flatten their noses and crash their eye sockets in and all the rest of it. And I'll never forget looking up, and there he was, because I didn't realise that it changed their bowlers. So, I'm on strike. I looked up and there's Malcolm Marshall. And, mate, it's the only time it happened in my life. My knees started involuntarily shaking. I had to stop it. I'm like, that's Malcolm Marshall. Anyway, he was right at the end and he was just going through the motions because it was a tour match. But, yeah, I mean, the same game, I reckon it was Patrick Powell. It might have been Ian Bishop. Those two were vying for a spot in the test match the next week. So they were really winding it up. And I reckon it was Ian Bishop bowled me a bouncer that went miles over my head. They had little Junior Murray as the wicketkeeper. The ball went miles over his head and literally half volleyed into the side screen.
Into the fence.
So it carried the whole way and then one bounce into the side screen. So, mate, I watched Alan Border all those years and Greg Chappell before that. And, I just don't know how they did it. They stood up to those blokes and made runs. And I see them since and I look at them and go, mate, that is majesty, because Christ knows how they did that. I reckon I batted for an hour, made about 5, and had no clue, no idea.
Do you think, with an average of 42, do you think you ever could have cracked it for a game for Australia, or you were just too far in the pecking order?
No, too far in the pecking order. And, mate, those days, the Australian team was Slater, Taylor, Boone, War, Border. And, mate, you're not kicking any of those blokes out. I always say, within the team I played in, we had Jamie Siddons, Greg Blewett, and Darren Lehman, who were all better players than I was, and they were all not getting a game for Australia. So, mate, I had to jump those 3 just to get a game out of my own team, let alone, the Stuart Laws and the Michael Bevans and the blokes. Justin Langer and Damien Martin weren't getting a game at that stage. Matthew Hayden wasn't getting a game at that stage. I mean, the batting in Australia was just incredible. So, no, mate, I was a fair way back from them. I will put it this way, though, Causa. There have been a couple that have got a game in the last 18 months that I reckon I might have pushed. But, mate, in my day, the batting stocks were nuts. And Mike Hussey's another one. Huss was playing back into my career. Yeah. He wasn't playing for Australia. What an amazing cricketer he ended up being. So, yeah, we were just blessed with batting, and they were all better than me.
Yeah. Now, the journey, how did you end up following the mighty Kangaroos? Like being from Western Australia?
Yeah, I reckon if you're just a normal kid, you choose your team when you're about 8 or 9. That's about the time when you work out which team you like. We were in the West, obviously, and I was born in 67. So when I was 8, was 75. Yeah. And we went on that tear of playing in 5 grand finals in a row. And I've told him this many times, but I was the most obsessed Malcolm Blight fan in the whole of Western Australia. I got my dad to buy me a North Melbourne jumper. I took it down to the sports store and got number 15 properly sewn into it, so it was authentic. And because I used to wear it everywhere. And, because what a superstar Blight he was. Left foot, right foot, used to take the hangers and kick the goals from the boundary. And
very much like yourself.
Had the blonde hair. I loved him. So that was the first thing. And secondly, 77, I reckon, was the first ever grand final in colour. And I know for young people watching now, they can't believe that. But back in the day, colour TV only started in 1977. And I remember watching that game on a colour TV. We didn't have one. We must have gone to a mate's place that had one. So I remember watching it. And as stupid as this sounds, the black and white of Collingwood didn't look any different. But the royal blue and white of North Melbourne just jumped out of this TV screen. And, of course, you know, the one I watched on colour was the second one that we won.
Yeah.
So by then, mate, it was just locked in. I was just an obsessed North fan. And I was a big Claremont supporter, obviously, because Dad and Mark played there. So the Cracker brothers went to North from Claremont, and that just, you know, they were just magnificent. So, yeah, I just had a love for the place, and it didn't matter that West Coast came in. I was never budging. And then Mark played there, of course. And so I got to know all you blokes, which was even better. You know, I remember sometimes going over to Melbourne when I was playing for South Australia, and I used to sneak in the rooms and catch up with all you blokes after the games. And so I got an even better insight of what a cracking club it was. So, yeah, I've just loved the place.
And you did, as you said, you had an intimate knowledge of the North Melbourne Footy Club. What was the friendly advice that you had for your brother? And you told him when he went to North Melbourne that he had to follow a bloke called Darren Steele.
Yep, I did.
And
I said to him,
what was the quote that you actually said to him?
I can't remember what I actually said, but I said to him, mate, you're lucky because you're going to the best footy club in the comp. And I said, mate, they do it differently at North. It's a beautiful place, and the way they go about it is superb. And I said, there's a bloke called Darren Steele, and I hadn't even met him. I said, mate, he is as hard as a cat's head. And I said, if you play footy for us like he plays footy for us, then you'll go all right. And it's funny because Steely and Sticks, as you know, are now tight as a drum. Just lives around the corner. He's one of the great blokes, Steely, and very, very humble fella. But, you know, that was the way, as you know, players that came to North were taught to play. You put your head over the ball and you pile in. And, yeah, he was a ripper. He was one of my favourites, Steely.
It's quite funny you should say that, because when I spoke to your brother, he would quote exactly what you said, quote, unquote, but the one bit you left out, he said, but you won't play anything like him.
Well, you know what brothers are like, Causa. They're very faint with their praise. But, actually, Mark, to be fair, I mean, you played with him a bit too. He was a victim of being in the wrong era. He would actually play very well now. You know, now that you need to run, you know, you need to get up and back. He was a very good aerobic athlete, Sticks. What he wasn't was that big, strong body as a defender, standing toe-to-toe with Terry Danaher's. And, you know, he wasn't built like that. But so, you know, quite rightly, he played 30-odd games, and that's, mate, don't get me wrong, that's 32 or whatever it is games more than I played. But if he was born, you know, playing now, the way modern AFL footy's played would suit him much more. He had good skill, good overhead, but great aerobics, so he could have got up and back, and he would have been better in the modern era, I reckon. But, mate, if you ask him, he doesn't give a stuff. He played at a great club and played, you know, with some of the best people alive. Exactly
right. Now, I love, obviously, I love the story of how it come to pass that you ended up as being president of the footy club that you grew up idolising. So take us through it, because I just think it's a fantastic story, and there's a lot of grateful North Melbourne people out there that you did what you did.
Mate, it's such a long story, but I'll cut the bit you're talking about short. We had a board at the time. When I came on, I was so naive about how boards even work, let alone footy club boards, and I had no idea what our board was actually facing. I really did it because RJ and Sticks came to me and said, we've got to put a members ticket together. Do you want to run with us? And I said, oh, yeah, I love the club. I'll do anything I can to help, you know. So I got on the board, and what I didn't realise was that half the board wanted us to go and half the board didn't want us to go. And I wasn't even aware that was the case. So we had this horrible year of pushing and pulling. And mate, the guys on the board at the time who wanted to leave, I look back, Causa, and I don't have any problem with that, because those blokes were 100% convinced that that was the best thing for the club. So I look at that and say at the time that's what they wanted. But I thought we've got to firstly exhaust every way we can to see if we can stay down here in Melbourne.
Yeah.
So what happened was we got right to the end of the year, and all of this sort of stuff was being unsaid and all the rest of it. And again, naively, at a board meeting, said, well, why don't we have a vote? I just said, let's do it, And I knew that Mark, because he was interstate in a meeting, he said to me, mate, you've got my proxy. If it comes to a vote, you can vote for me, so that's fine. So I knew I had him, but I didn't know. I knew RJ wasn't going to vote us, for us to leave. So I knew that three of us were. But my whole thinking about it was, let's just get on with it. All this waiting around and stuffing around is not helping anyone. If it is that we have to leave, then let's at least let's start going forward.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I said, let's have a vote. So we had a vote, and the vote came up something like 5-4 to stay. So I'm sitting in this room and I'm looking around the board table and I'm thinking, Jesus, this is not quite as I expected it to be. Anyway, so quite rightly, the four blokes in the room who wanted the club to go to the Gold Coast immediately, as you would, said, well, I'm out. So they got up and left, and Sticks was in Sydney, I think. So there were four of us sitting around the table, and it was 100% was like, well, what do we do now? Now that we got to, what's the next thing we do? Anyway, I remember one of them, I don't know who it was, to be honest, one of the other blokes in the room turned around to me and said, well, you're the chairman. And I said, no, I'm not. I never agreed to that. And they said, mate, you're it. Anyway, so we then went from there to Dallas Brooks Hall for that famous night.
Yeah.
And, and that was because everyone at that place that night thought we were leaving. So the 3,500-4,000 people there, Causa, were looking for blood. I remember walking in there and the tension in that room and the anger in that room and the frustration and the disappointment and, the people in there were savage. And, because they thought we were coming to announce that we're going to leave. Anyway, so when we said we're staying, was one of the most surreal moments of my life, because all 3,500 of them suddenly went from being the angriest group of people alive to the most ecstatic group of people alive. And it turned into
even what I did, sorry to jump in, but even what I did, I got wind of it that we were actually staying. So I remember I jumped in the car and quickly came down. And if there's ever a time in your life that you would have felt like Donald Trump when you walked out to the crowd, you just walked out there. You were like the Messiah. You could have said anything at that point.
Oh, mate. And yeah, you're right. It was an amazing night. And you know what that did is, at the end of it, I got in my car and I remember driving home, firstly thinking, Jesus, what have I bitten off here? But secondly, I thought, if our club can elicit that response out of that many people, then we've got something worth fighting for. And, as you know, because you were close to it, but those first couple of years after that, 08, 09, it was pretty tough. The AFL were after us. They were annoyed that we hadn't done as we were told. And the budgets were pretty tight, and, we had to work bloody hard through that time. But I remember saying to the great staff we had, and they, take a huge amount of the credit, basically all the credit. They were amazing. But I remember saying to Eugene Rocker and our staff, the one thing we've got to do from now on is we can't spend more than we earn. Let's start with that. This piling up of debt, it's got to stop. So that was the first thing we did. And then gradually, the business built, and, we had great, the other thing, Causa, is we had great coaches. Dean Laidley, you think about, what that poor bastard had to work through as a senior coach at our club, all that turmoil. Had one full-time assistant, I reckon, and two part-time, one physio, one doctor, Con Metropolis. That was it. That was his whole footy department staff. And yet we played finals 06, prelim 07, finals 08. I mean, so much admiration for Tunnell, a former teammate of yours. And then after that, Croc did a great job as the interim coach when Dean left. And then Brad Scott came on. And those three blokes were incredible, because what we never did in that time was lost on-field credibility. We never went to the bottom. And that is such a credit to those blokes, but it's also huge credit to Simo, Steve-O, Brady Rawlings, Drew Petrie, the shin boners at that time, Arch, obviously, the real fabric blokes at the club. Just Boomer just stood up and went, they really dragged the club onto their back and took us through that incredible incredibly tough period. So, you know, we were very lucky while we were rebuilding to have a very, very good footy department.
So yeah, you're driving home in the car, and it suddenly dawns on you that you're president. Like, whose advice did you seek about, number one, about being president in the AFL, and number two, from a leadership capacity, to go, well, how am I going to go about it?
Well, it's funny because all the presidents were great, but certainly all the Victorian ones. There are a few interstate ones that weren't as pumped, but the Victorian ones are fantastic. So, you know, people like Eddie Maguire were straight on the phone. Frank Costa, you know, people like that ringing up. Well, I say Eddie Maguire. When I first got on the board, he wasn't that pumped because at that stage I was hosting the Footy Show and he was running Channel 9. So, you know, he's like, what the hell are you doing? But when I became the chairman, he was great. He rang me straight away and said, mate, anything you need, let me know. Frank Costa was brilliant. Actually, Brian Cook was fantastic too while I'm on Geelong. I remember saying to Cookie, can I grab, you know, half an hour of your time? And I reckon he and I sat down for hours and he was wonderful.
Yeah.
You know? He said, mate, this is what we tried. This is what worked for us. This is what didn't work for us. These are the things that I'd be focusing on. He was terrific. But you can say, you know, across the board, the Victorian, one of the things about the Victorian clubs is we punch on a lot, but when it really matters, Causa, the Victorian clubs were great. They all, you know, Stephen Kernahan, one of my favourite people on the planet, was, you know, I'm not sure if he was actually the chairman of, or the president of Carlton at the time. I reckon he probably was. It was before Dick Pratt came in, and he was magnificent. He and I, well, he got together and grabbed me and said, let's go to the AFL and put this Friday night thing to them. Carlton North every year, and as you remember, for about 5 or 6 straight years, we had our only Friday night game was against Carlton. He said, you can have all the takings. It's your home game. So Carlton were magnificent. Sticks was brilliant. So we got great support from the clubs in Melbourne. But really, mate, I would say this to anyone who's preparing to take on those roles. There's nothing anyone can say to get you ready for it. You just got to roll your sleeves up, pull your chair into the desk and get started. And, you know, back yourself and back your people and you know, be honest and do the best you can do.
And then also how, I suppose it was even doing the research to chat to you, but I think for a lot of footy people out there and a lot of North Melbourne people out there, Peter Scanlon, like how big was he? I understand from a financial sense in terms of what he could bring to the table, but not that you needed any chance to enhance your swagger, but he probably gave he probably gave the opportunity going into certain meetings. Was there a certain meeting at the AFL he might have come to a meeting with you with Demetrio?
It was unbelievable. For a start, I said it when we made him a life member. It actually didn't matter what anyone else did. Without Pete, our club wouldn't be here. So he is a titan of the North Melbourne Footy Club, and also one of the better blokes I've ever met. Superb, man. Yeah. I love him. And so he was great to me and great to us. You know, he backed our board, he backed our management team. You know, so not possible for any North Melbourne person to thank Peter Scanlon enough. I've said many times there should be a statue of him out the front. But I do remember vividly, we were going to a meeting in the boardroom at the AFL, and it was about Tassie, I reckon, and we were desperate to get games played in Hobart because we needed to grow our supporter base for obvious reasons, and 250,000 people down there. And I thought, brilliant ground. I'd obviously played a lot of cricket down there. Great people, great part of the world. Let's go and play some games down in Hobart and really embrace the best, you know, the biggest sort of city in Tassie. And, you know, so I just thought it was a no-brainer, and it's proven to be an amazing thing for North. And, you know, the people in Tassie are fantastic, and I love the games we play down there. But we had to convince the AFL to schedule us. There's no point doing a deal with the government or anyone down there if the AFL aren't going to schedule us. Anyway, as I said before, they had softened a bit on us, but we still weren't their favourite, given what had happened in the whole Gold Coast thing. So we had to go into the AFL. You always went to them, Causa. They never came to you. You always went to them. And it was their boardroom. And I remember thinking this could end up being a bit of a bun fight. So anyway, during the week, I thought, how can we sort of balance this meeting out a bit? So I rang Pete. I said, Pete, can you do me a favour? And this is what he's like. He said, anything. What do you need? I said, I've got this meeting coming up. I can sniff a bit of a bun fight. I'd love you to come along and give me your thoughts on, on the meeting. He goes, yeah, no problem. So anyway, we walk in. I reckon there's Mike Fitzpatrick, Andrew Demetriou, maybe Gill, who was the two I see at that stage, and one other. So there are four of the biggest heavyweights in the AFL. I reckon Eugene was our CEO at that stage. So Eugene, myself, I can't remember who else, maybe Chris Simmons, head of finance, and last into the room. So their faces are all, looking pretty normal as we walk in. They're pretty comfortable with the fact that they probably had us covered, they thought. The last person into the room was Peter Scanlon, and I'll never forget the blood draining out of Andrew Demetriou's face because he didn't know Pete was coming. So he's just looked at Peter and gone, I'll never forget it. He said, "Oh, Peter, I didn't realise you were coming." And Pete, this is why he's a genius, Pete just looked at him and said, "I'd like to think I'm welcome." They all went, "Oh, no, of course you're welcome," because people that know Peter Scanlon's history know he was a commissioner for many years and an unbelievably good AFL commissioner, one of the brightest blokes, ever. So we went into that meeting and it just gave us a bit of artillery, because he sat there and they sort of talked about, how we could do these games and all the rest of it. And we got up and left and we got a pretty good result out of it. So, yeah, I mean, his towering intellect, but also his presence was, he was behind us. And when you've got someone like that behind you, you're right. You walk a bit taller.
Now, in a second, we will go to. I've asked you to come up with some favourite North Melbourne moments of all time. But before I get to that, it must be incredibly satisfying to know when you came on board and were roughly about $9 million in debt.
Yep.
$9 million in debt. As we know, the grandstand was falling down. We're working out of a portable. So then, how long were you as chairman at the North Melbourne Footy Club? Was it 9 years?
9 years. I was on the board for 10 years. And we put in place pretty soon after I started as the chairman that you could only have 3 terms as the chairman, and which I think is a good thing for our club. So you roll over. So I had 3 terms as the chairman. Look, of course, what I always say is we had an unbelievable team of people. We had a cracking board. Some of the directors who came on board in those early stages when the business was very precarious, they put their own reputations on the line. I mean, Dennis came on as a director, as the footy director, but we had people like Trevor O'Hoy and Jeff Lewis and Will Horton. These are QCs and huge people in business. And, for them to say, I'll put my reputation on the line to join this board and help was incredible. Andrew Carter, for instance, and Andrew, I loved Andrew, and he was one of the people who said, I actually want to go to the Gold Coast. But once we didn't, he said, righto, you've made your decision, I'll back you. Stephen Head, the same. So those 2 guys were absolutely brilliant. The shareholders actually were all great. So we had a great board and a great management team, and the management team are the ones. They got the club at 7:30 in the morning and left at 7:30 at night and worked their asses off for 10 years to get rid of that debt, to build that facility, to get the revenue from 23 million to 45 million, to get the membership. When I first started, membership was early 20,000s. In 2016, when I left, I think it was 46,000. So that is all credit to, firstly, Huge and his team, and then Carl Delena and his team. Just incredibly committed people who did a great job. But, we got our challenges at the moment with this coronavirus thing. But the fact, talking to Ben Amafio, who I know really well, the CEO now, the fact that the club's debt-free going into this pandemic crisis is such a big thing. So we'll come out of it really well because we're not carrying any debt. And that's a credit to not only the staff through that 10-year period, but the other thing, cause it, is we used to say to the members, it's $160 to be a member, but if you put an extra $20 in, that'll go off the debt. I think it was $20 or $30, one of those 2. And every year, I reckon 90% of North Melbourne members said, I'll give you the extra 30. And that's why the debt came down. So, it's each and every North Melbourne member that helped us get rid of that debt. So, we can only thank them with everything we got.
Now, it goes without saying, I suppose I've been your biggest offender. And, what about Caro? I got to bring it up, but it does get to the point, how much would it frustrate you at any opportunity that she would feel the need, and even when you're still gone, we're still going to flog a dead horse and still not give North Melbourne any credit?
Yeah, I never minded what anyone said. If it was an opinion, you're entitled to your opinion, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're writing stuff that I know is incorrect, and I get the feeling that the writer knows it's incorrect, but they decide to write it anyway just to discredit me or our club, that's when I got annoyed. And, you know, the other thing, Causa, is in the public space, someone at some stage has got to stand up and push back. You know, you can't just keep copying it. And through that time, we copped it, as you know. And eventually I was just like, mate, enough. You know, I'm not having our brand and our club trashed by these people. And I was lucky, I guess. I had a pretty strong media platform to fight back with. And so we did. You know, just pointing out the stuff that was untrue, the stuff that was inaccurate, the stuff that was unfair, you know. What I found funny about all of that, not picking out individuals, but, you know, we copped our fair share of, you know, of abuse in the press and, you know, people piling into us. What I used to find funny, Causa, is when you eventually said enough's enough and you fired back, the reaction that happened then was what always made me laugh. People going, oh, hang on a minute, where'd that come from? I'm like, mate, you've been giving it to us for 10 years. We fire one shot back at you, and suddenly it's, oh, hang on, that's a bit stiff. You know, I'm like, mate, we are not just going to sit back and cop it. You know, we're eventually going to fire back because, you know, we're competitive and we love our club, and our club's a great place, and our club's doing amazing things. And, you know, so that's a bit of, I guess, where it came from was, you know, we all just said enough's enough. You know, we've copped it long enough. We don't have to cop it anymore. We're in a good spot. But, you know, that's all the cut and thrust of what we do. And the other day, when this whole relocate to Tassie thing came back up, I'm like, you've got to be joking. You know, like, do your research, do your homework, find out before you say ridiculous things. Find out, you know. And there's no way we're going to Tasmania permanently. We love our involvement down there. It's brilliant. If Tassie end up having their own team at some stage, that's brilliant too. But at the moment, they haven't. We play a parcel of games down in Hobart that are fantastic for us, and I think fantastic for the people of that city. But we're not moving. We're not going anywhere. Ben Buckley's on record saying we're not moving anywhere. So why bring it up again? You know, it's especially during this coronavirus crisis. There's enough negativity going around. Enough people are uncertain as to what life's throwing at them without, you know, bringing that garbage up. So, yeah, you know, I probably re-entered the fray there, Causa, when it wasn't my place to, because I'm not the chairman anymore. But anyway, you got to stand your ground.
Exactly right. And on to positive things. We've, as we said, I asked JB to come up with some of his favourite North Melbourne moments of all time. Now, I know Am's just going to roll some footage, my producer that's on there. He's actually, I know there were a couple, JB. I know you mentioned the final against Richmond in front of 93,000. And I know the Essendon game. But before that footage comes up, I think for you, and I know we touched on it before we came on air, is it the big thing for you that after when you've been at the club for a number of years, to then finally see them come out and do their thing on the big stage? Is that why these moments are pretty special to you? Yeah,
well, you know better than anyone, Causa. The thing Dennis Pagan always used to say, you know, to me when he was on the board was, you know, he used to say, "I tell you what this club does, son." You know, he puts a son on the end of everything. I love Dennis, by the way. He said, "I tell you what this club does, son. We get into September, and when we get into September, we win." And that resonated so much with me. In other words, no good just getting there. When you get to a final, you got to win it. And he drilled that in to you guys when you played, I'm sure, and certainly when he was a director. And so when we, you know, because we had a spell out of the finals, obviously, from 2008 to 2014, I think it was, where we were, you know, rebuilding a list and we're out of the finals. When we got back in there, you know, it was so brilliant to be back on the big stage. And the games you're talking about, what made them great was that they were at the MCG and the Coliseum, and they were against those two massive clubs. So you've got North up against Essendon, and then North up against Richmond. And, you know, the Essendon game, well, we were 30 points down at half-time. And I think they kicked a goal to be 36 points down just in the early stages of the third quarter. So, that's a big deficit in a final. But I remember running into Glenn Archer at half-time, and Arch said to me, mate, we're right. We'll change a few things up. We'll be all right. And I'm like, Arch, we're 6 goals down. And then suddenly, halfway through that third quarter, the thing just started to change. And, the run from behind started. People like Sean Atley just started that emphatic running from behind and the run and carry through the centre of the ground. And that unbelievable momentum started to build. And I just thought, I don't know why, because it took us a long time to hit the front. I think we were sort of halfway through the last quarter before we finally hit the front, the old Frank the Tank. But it sort of felt to me like that was going to happen. We were going to find a way and run over the top of them and win, and that's what happened. And the intense rivalry with Essendon. I'm looking at the vision now. It's like it was bloody yesterday. It's amazing. So, it was one of those incredible days where you were just very proud to be a North Melbourne person.
Like in games like this, how do you go? Like, do you find yourself? Is it hard when you're a president, and invariably the eyes are on you? But is it hard not to basically lose your mind like we all were at this point, where we're so involved in the game, and especially against our most bitter rival in Essendon?
Yeah, I was actually always pretty good at maintaining sort of composure as a viewer. I used to burn inside Wellesley. What about the job he did that day? Played centre half forward, Daniel Wells, in that final, and I don't reckon he'd hardly played for the 2 months leading up, and was just incredible. So I used to burn inside, but I wasn't sort of demonstrative. I was able to sit and sort of stay pretty calm, but I used to get annoyed when we did things that were so obviously not counterproductive. But in games like that, you just got to sit back and know that you're just blessed to be in a final against a huge club at a massive ground and look at the spitter there to get over the line, Lance. It's just brilliant. So yeah, they're the great days. You played in 7 straight prelims, Causa. They're just the great days. Finals are what you live for.
Yeah, I think even for me, when you especially play a big night game at the MCG, and there is nothing better if you can stand up in front of a big rival and play well. As we said before we came on air, I think it's memories. It's no different to probably cricket or any sport. If you can perform under the big stage, the bright lights, there is nothing better, because you take that memory with you forever in terms of a performance. You can always draw on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, the game the next year against Richmond, 93,000, Ben Brown really emerged out of that game. And what a player he's turned into for the club. So, yeah, you're 100% spot on. I'm impatient, as all North Melbourne people are, for us to get back into that September action. I think Reece is brilliant. I think that the list is actually really starting to build nicely. So I'm very confident that it'll happen, because no one likes missing out on the finals. September's, well, it's going to be different this year. It's going to be November or whenever it is. But finals are what you exist for as a footy club. So, so they were great and proud days. I remember another amazing one, Causa. We were playing Collingwood. I reckon it was about 2009 or 10 or whatever. Anyway, yeah. Collingwood had absolutely pounded us for a long period of time. They had really good sides through then. We, as I say, were sort of trying to work our way back up. So they'd beaten us, left, right, centre. This one night was really seesawing at the G. Alan Didak, I reckon, late missed one from about 25 out on the run directly in front. And then it was pretty much all tied up with about 20 seconds to go. And these are the days before the recall bounce. So the umpires bounced the ball, and it has gone sideways left over the top of the Collingwood ruckman, straight into Adam Simpson's hands, who's kicked it straight to the top of the square, front and centre, snap, goal, game over, we've won. The Collingwood fans were headless, and fair enough too, because the bounce was just horrific. And these days it would have been blow the whistle, recall bounce, obviously, but those days that didn't happen. I remember getting in the lift to go down to our rooms with Huge, actually, who of course was at Collingwood previously, and all of these Collingwood people piled into the lift, and they're all giving it to us left, right and centre, and robbery and disgrace and all the rest of it. Anyway, I remember just smiling inwardly and thinking that every now and then, Causa, the bounce goes your way.
Yeah, and it would have been a nice mongrel Adam Simpson special kicked into the forward line. Very similar to the bounce, I'm tipping.
That's it, just a floater, but he kicked it to exactly the right spot, about 25 out, and I don't know who got on the end of it. But yeah, I mean, so that was when I was involved. But you talked to me about what it's like watching. I was far more rabid watching you blokes in the 90s than I ever was as the chairman. When I used to watch us play in the 90s, and I was in South Australia most of that time playing cricket, I was up out of my seat. I was jumping at the television. I was like any mad North fan. And obviously we had an unbelievable period of success. And, I used to drive over and in the Sticks and I'd go to the Friday night games, and then we'd have the weekend with Mark and Deb, and we'd be watching. And such a brilliant style of footy that you guys played at that time, I thought. And of course we had the ace in the hole. If we ever got sort of 3 or 4 down at 3/4 time, you just looked at number 18 and you knew he'd dig us out of it. And I remember one night against Richmond, you would have been playing, we were 20 points down or 22 points down at 3/4 time, which in those days was a big margin. It isn't now, but those days 4 goals was a decent margin. And I was sitting with Doc up in the stands, Craig Scholl, and he said I remember vividly, he said to me, "We'll win." He said, Duck will fire up. He'd had a pretty quiet night. He said, we'll win. And I went, Jesus, I hope you're right, Doc. Anyway, I reckon Duck took 6 contested marks in the quarter. He kicked 3, Horse kicked 4, and we kicked 8 unanswered goals and won by 20-odd points, 30 points. And I remember walking into town to have a beer into Melbourne with Sholey and my brother, and I reckon Bluey was there too, actually. And I remember just thinking, this is a nuts joint. They'd never beaten, which is the motto that our club lives by, right the way through, just never beaten. And we're lucky we had the Dennis Lilly of football. In my time watching Australia, whenever they got in trouble, they threw the ball to DK and he just found a way to dig us out of it. And that was the same with Duck. He had an unbelievable team around him, yourself included, but he was the X factor.
It is funny. I say that to Scotty Dowsett. I go, how lucky were you blokes when you used to come and watch us during the 90s? I go, you rock up on a Friday night, you come there knowing you're probably going to win 9 times out of 10. You can have a few beers, and after the game, you get to go out. I go, how good's life for you blokes?
Yeah, I know, it was gold. Don't worry. A lot of the times I went out, because I used to run into you, so the players are out as well. But, no, it was... And as I say, we played in 7 straight prelims, but we lost games as well. But what I loved about it is, the never beaten, that you blokes left everything out there. And when I was at North as the chairman, Brad would tell you and Dean would tell you, I very rarely had anything to do with talking to the players or whatever. But the one thing I always said to them is, win, lose or draw, leave it all out there. Walk off having given everything you got, and North Melbourne people will be proud of you. It's not always about winning, because you're not going to win every game you play, but it's about having an almighty crack. And at the end, if you hold your head up, and we had blokes through my time who were the epitome of that. Spud Ferrito. Doesn't get mentioned very often, Spud Ferrito. He would be in the top 5 of my most loved North Melbourne players, because firstly, he left everything out there every single time he played. But secondly, the other thing I loved was if anyone ever got a cheap shot behind the ball or whatever, Spud used to make a beeline from the other end of the ground, and he'd have him in a headlock or have him over the fence, and he flew the flag beautifully. So, I always said, blokes like that, if we've got them at our club, we're always going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, in our last sort of 5 or 10 minutes, mate, quick story, Footy Show. How did you become that you and Gary ended up, you were going to take over from Ed? Just a quick on how that come about?
Well, that's interesting too, because we were doing a show with Sam on Sunday called Any Given Sunday, which was straight after the Sunday Footy Show for an hour. And it was literally a show with no running sheet. Gary would come straight off hosting the Sunday Footy Show, and then the 3 of us would just absolutely make it up as we went along. What it really was just a platform for Sam to do whatever he wanted, and he was properly hilarious. So that show only went for 1 year with us on anyway. I think it went with Mick Malloy might have done it afterwards, but only went for 1 year with us on it. But it was great fun. And then obviously all this noise came about Ed going and running the network in Sydney, so he wasn't going to be the host of the Footy Show anymore. And at the time, and this is, again, on all of my children, I said publicly, so it's not even a secret, I said, Gary, who I think's enormously talented media performer, you know, he should be the host of the Footy Show, and he'll do a brilliant job. He's been on it for 20 years anyway, or however long it was, 15 years. And so I said, you know, it's just a no-brainer. He goes in and hosts that show. It won't miss a beat. I never, ever thought about being involved in it, to be honest, because I just thought, there's no spot for me. He's the man. He and I are great mates. I knew he'd do a great job. So, you know, for me, it was just an easy aired out, Gary in. Anyway, so there was a lot of speculation that it'd be the two of us, but I couldn't really see why. Anyway, I remember being called into a meeting at Bendigo Street at 9, and I thought to myself at the time, you know, you don't need to kick me in the head. You know, you don't need to tell me personally that I haven't got the job. I'm totally across the fact that I haven't got the job, and I'm totally supportive of Gary doing it, you know. So I wasn't worried at all. And I almost thought as I'm driving into this meeting, you know, just ring and tell me. Or you don't even need to do that. Just announce him. It's, you know, you don't owe me. You don't owe me anything. That was my thinking. Anyway, so I turn up and I'm sitting in this sort of waiting room area, and inside Gary, Tim Cleary, who was the producer of the show, I think Jeff Brown, I can't remember who it was. Anyway, the big wigs. And all I remember was being a bit filthy, causer, thinking, why are you you don't need to humiliate me in person. Just tell me. I'm easy with it, you know. Anyway, so I walk in expecting them to say, look, you know, we're going with Gary. And I'm like, no worries. You know? Anyway, they said, righto, so you two are doing it. And, you know, we need to start working out what we're going to put around you. And I'm like, what? No one had said a word to me to that point. And, you know, so when I expressed that to the people in the room, they were blown away. They're like, but surely you knew you were doing it. I said, no, mate. I honestly thought Gary was doing it. And, you know, I believed strongly that he should do it. So it was all a bit weird at the start. But then we started doing it, had a few rocky sort of moments early on, but it quickly found its feet. And the reason I love doing that show, mate, is I love the blokes I worked with. Those Sam and Gary, Bill, Croft, mate, they were brilliant people to work with. And the staff were great too, Brent Williams and Tim before that. The blokes that ran it were great. So it was great fun every week to turn up for 2 hours and do live television with blokes as good as that. And we had a ball. And, you know, I think people had a ball watching it because of the chemistry of all the people on it, you know. And we put a lot of shit on each other, obviously. And Sam was the best ever at doing that. So he used to put it on me and put it on Gary and put it on Croft and Bill. And we, you know, created that environment where, you know, there were no holds barred.
Now, speaking of no holds barred and putting shit on one another, we're on the Triple M Saturday Rub. I was talking to Damo about this the other day. I said there were times listening to you blokes on the Saturday Rub where I'd actually have to pull over in the car, where I'd actually be laughing that hard. But you've made yourself. Are you the self-anointed leader of the Triple M commentary team, JB? Is it?
Well, I, as the host, people sort of tend to say that. But how do you know, how are you the leader with? When I first started doing that show, Sam Newman, Brian Taylor, Dermot Brereton, Jason Dunstall, you know, I walked in, and after that, Gary came across from 3AW. I walked in as this nobody from South Australia into that group of blokes. And they're the biggest names in football and the biggest personalities. So I remember sitting in a sort of meeting with these blokes, looking at them going, Jesus, I don't belong here. These are sort of massive names and massive personalities. So it took a while to sort of get that straight in my own head. But, mate, they were the best blokes ever. I mean, you know them all. How good are they? Dermot, wonderful. The Chief, speaking about blokes that are good at hanging shit on people, the Chief might be the best ever. And he put it on me more than anyone else, which I absolutely loved. And he and I are great mates to this day. He's a jet. But Sam Newman, again, like the Footy Show, that Saturday Rub was really set up for him. You know, we just put a platform down for him to do whatever the hell he wanted. And for those first, I reckon, 10 years of doing the show that he did it, some of the stuff he came out with, you know, like he used to, one stage causer, he took a live microphone into 3AW and interrupted their show to interview them for our show. And you're looking in there and there's like Tim Lane and sort of Lee Matthews and Rex Hunt, and they're all looking at him like, what the hell are you doing? And he's interviewing them live for our show on their show while they're trying to. I mean, it was just mayhem. You know, I remember Dermot had flatulence one day. This is how bad it got. He had flatulence one day, and Sam had no tolerance for anyone who passed wind. And Dermot said, right, well, I'm going to have to leave the box. And Sam's like, good, you're not doing it in here. And then Dermot, this is 100% true, said, I'll do it next door. So he walked into 3AW drop. On air, I'm looking through the glass, and these blokes are all thinking, well, who's done that? And it was Derm who then scuttled back into ours. So, no, it was pretty. It was funny. It was irreverent. It was hardly anything to do with footy, and it was really set up to bring out the genius in Sam. And then when he left, you know, Gary came in and Spud came in, and you know, it just became an ongoing thing of blokes just putting shit on each other. And it's the thing I always say, cause with that is it's like a barbecue. You know yourself. You go to a barbecue with great mates. Everyone's polite for, what do you reckon, about 15 minutes? Then 15 minutes in, bang, someone says something, and then someone piles in on top of him, and then someone's in on top of him, and then it's on. And that's what makes Australian blokes, I reckon, so funny, is they just put shit on each other, and it's gold. As long as they're mates, and as long as it comes from a good place, it's just the funniest thing ever. And that's really what the rub's all about.
And I've watched numerous episodes, and even before coming into today, where you Google a couple of things. Do you almost feel, even moving forward, that without, how do I best put it, but even with Spud, his legacy is still there today with you blokes, that he's always a part of you blokes moving forward? Because, God, I listened to some of those, the thing with Chompers and all the different episodes. You know, I mean, there were that many different things where he was just an absolute genius in the way that he went about it.
Oh, and, you know, it's a tragic loss. So I still can't believe it. I heard the recalling of which game was it? The drawn grand final, I reckon, Collingwood St Kilda the other day. And Spud was part of the commentary team, I reckon. And, just listening to him during the course of that, thinking, how isn't he here anymore? You know, like, it's so bloody sad. But you're right. He was extraordinarily talented, Spud, a lot of the time without knowing it. You know, the stuff that came out of his mouth, he was just complete fly by the seat of your pants. But the funniest thing about Spud, and there are lots of funny things about him, the funniest thing about Spud was that he was terrified of Gary. Like, anything Gary said, Spud just agreed with, because he was terrified of ever being on the wrong side of Gary. So Spud would come in and he'd go, I'm telling you, I'm going hard off the top with the fact that, you know, Corey McKernan, I'm just going to make this up, Corey McKernan takes too big a run up when in the first bounce. He's got to come in closer. He runs in from too far. And Spud would be adamant. Anyway, so we'd go, all right, well, you go with that then. So we'd start the show and the normal BS would go on, and then I'd go, and Spud, you want to talk about Corey McKernan? And Gary would say, what, the fact that he's got that really great long run up that really helps him get up high and win the ruck? And Spud would go, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Just completely change the story because Gary said what he said. And Damo and I would look at him and go, Spud, you are pathetic. You have 100% changed your view on that. But that's what it was. And so Gary knew, and so he used to play those angles, and we would just roar with laughter. So that's one example of why he was brilliant. But again, mate, not precious. Everyone was happy when it was your turn to get thrown under the bus. You stuck your head in and you copped it. And it was a thing that people listening to thinking, if those 4 or 5 blokes are at the bar, I want to be near enough to hear what they're saying. That's the whole vibe of it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was. It was a must. Well, yeah, you couldn't miss it, like each Saturday, Rob. But look, it's been fantastic to sit down with you, mate. Like we've been going for an hour, and it feels like it's gone for about 5 minutes. I've got a big thank you for our major sponsor. I'll send these in the mail. I know that you use these little puppies.
Beautiful.
So they're National Make Good Solutions golf balls. They are the ones. Nice. I'm pretty sure you use those ones.
Yeah, no.
Thank you. Make sure you don't lose them. No. Look, Look, on behalf of, I know, footy fans out there, I hope you've got a huge amount out of it, but I know all the North Melbourne fans out there, in particular me, mate, I know that, hey, by the way, if you drank that, I gave you a bottle of Grange. Did you end up drinking that?
No, mate. As I always say to you, any bottle of Grange that's given to me, we drink together. So when this lockdown finishes, we'll open it and drink it, the two of us.
Well, either that or we don't know what I was going to say. We either save it to a premiership. It might be best.
Well, we can do that too. No, mate, that's 100% my view of Grange. It's such a beautiful wine. Anyone who ever gives me one, I always say the same thing. We will drink it together. So it's in Marcella Corsa, and we will open it. And that's the other thing, mate. Don't ever forget what you did for our amazing club too. We are very, very proud of our past players, and your legacy at our joint's enormous. So thank you.
No, you're very good at deflecting attention, but I know that on behalf of a lot of North Melbourne fans out there, I think the comparison, I think you gave us all a voice. And in terms of having a Ron Casey type person that was in the media that gave us a voice, but more importantly, without people like yourself, Peter Scanlon, all the names that go on, we're still in North Melbourne. We've got a great facility to show for it. And I think on behalf of, well, not the other footy fans, but I know all the Kangaroos fans out there are eternally grateful that you did what you did. And it was an incredibly busy time in your life because you had the Footy Show and all the other things. But I think on behalf of everyone, big thank you.
Beauty, mate. Always great chatting to you, Causa, anytime.
All right. Not a problem, mate. Thank you.